what we're going to be talking about in this session is what we would kind of call the killer app. So how many of you in the audience right now are using mapping, geospatial as part of your open data pieces? Okay. Okay, so a fair number. And I think that there are a fair number of you because a lot of folks kind of equate open data with mapping. As soon as you have valuable data and information, the first question that we often get is, okay, how do we map that? How do we show that on a map? But what we're going to talk about today is more the stories and the impact around that. It's not just about, again, publishing data. I think that we've been harping on that this whole customer summit, that it really is about impact and outcomes in the story. So with our panelists here, we're gonna talk about, you know, the stories in their communities. So the session will cover maps, the new geo, a renaissance as we like to call it in geospatial, very exciting both from a technology perspective as well as from those stories and how maps are being utilized in the communities. And then we'll have a chance to ask our panelists some questions, and I have a few to ask you, and then we'll also go to the audience and have you ask them as well. So first I want to introduce Brett, and just a few words about Brett. He is a technical or a technologist, as he liked to call himself, a GIS specialist, and owns that for the city of Hartford. He's also the Open Data Solutions Manager for the city of Hartford. Brett has 20 years experience in GIS, and then also he's been at the city of Hartford for 8 years. In the past year, he's been responsible for Hartford's open data site. And then prior to Hartford, he was the GIS coordinator in Connecticut for Groton, for the city of Groton, and has done basically implementations for communities in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. So a ton of experience, and so we're looking forward to hearing from you. So Brett, come up and join us.
Okay, thank you. As Erica said, I'm really a technical person, and probably 10 months ago, our Chief Innovation Officer, Sabina Sotaro, went to Barcelona to a Smart Cities conference. And she came back and she started giving me literature about open data, and I really didn't know anything about it at the time. So then she asked me if I would manage an open data site for the city, and it was interesting because it really pulled me out of my comfort zone. And so it's been an interesting road. So as I was getting prepared to do this, as Erica said, I was really a technical person, and I started telling her what I wanted to do for a presentation, and she said, oh, well, that's really good, but we want you to tell a story, and I've never really given a presentation telling a story before, so this will be a new experience for me. So just to give you a little bit of a context, how we implemented open data in the city, on March 27th in 2014, the mayor announced that we were going to do an open data site and make our data open and transparent. And on April 1st, we started implementing the Socrata platform, which was very interesting to me. And on May 2nd was the first time I'd ever attended a hackathon, and I'll kind of go back to that as I go forward a little bit. That was really an eye-opening experience to me. I had no idea what one was or how to what to expect. And then on May 31st, that was kind of our target date that Sabina wanted me to have the open data up, and she wanted me to be able to tweet on the it was the I can't see. The National Day of Civic Hacking, and that was kind of a special day for me because I'd never sent a tweet before. I went around the office to try to find somebody to tell me, kind of give me some information about it, and then I did that as opposed to Googling it, and I really couldn't find anybody, but one of the fellows had a 15-year-old daughter that was pretty good with Twitter, so she taught me how to do it. That was kind of an interesting experience. And then on August 31st, we actually launched our portal live. So this is the hackathon that I went to, and it was very interesting. A colleague and I went, and we were coming out of one of the sessions, and I heard somebody calling my name, and it was the fellow in the beard sitting there, and he said, "Hey, do you have any data? We need grocery stores for the city because we're trying to do this project." And as part of the hackathon, and it was actually the first set of data that I had put up into the open data portal. So I walked out to my car and grabbed my MacBook and logged in, downloaded the data, emailed it to them, and so they used it and they put it up, and they actually won the $1,000 prize for being able to expand it. So that was kind of exciting to me that I never realized. So I wasn't supposed to do anything technical, but I put this slide in just to give it a little bit of context. So we're pulling data from multiple data sources, and we put it into like a staging SDE database, and from there we use FME to put it up into Socrata. That's been interesting to me. One of the data sets we pull is the Freedom of Information data. Sabita, being the innovator, decided that we needed a database to track the Freedom of Information requests. And then one of the local news stations FOI'd our FOI database. So we decided we'll put the FOI data up in there, and so if anybody else wants to see what the requests are, they can go right to the open data portal. So I'm really a map guy, and so the first thing I did was we belong to the ESRI Community Maps program, and so it was very interesting to me that Socrata had the connector to ESRI, because I don't use Google to map my data. I really use my enterprise. I really want to map my data using my enterprise data set. So as you zoom in, you can get down in really close, and you can start to see our buildings and our footprints. So I know that Google's a really great mapping engine for people that don't have a rich GIS database, but because we put an awful lot of attention into it, so it was really good for me to be able to do that. Also, we put restaurants down in there as well. So they have a really nice interface for being able to map the different restaurants and seeing the locations. And so we put that up on the homepage. And so as you zoom in, to be able to see data geospatially, I think it's really nice to see it in a table like that. But actually, if you can actually get down and see the location and put it on top of a building, it gives somebody a much better feel for gives a perspective, I think. Then one of the biggest data sets we did where we were able to put our police data up, and we put from 2005 to the current date minus 10 days, and we don't put up sexual assaults or investigations, but everything else is up there. And there was a lot of talk about how people were going to react to that, and we really didn't know. So it was very interesting to me. So I really like cartography, and I like making nice maps, and I would never have mapped something like this. But this is a fellow from Stephen Busemeyer from the Hartford Courant, and he put our data up. And the police department was really happy to see that it was being used for something really helpful, and that's the way he wanted to show it. And so great, I'm glad he got to use it. So as I was getting prepared for the presentation, I started searching around, and I was actually looking for the Hartford Courant data, and I found this website, and it's just like, geez, look at all that crime data. And I started going down, and it gives all the descriptions and what they are, and so I keep going down, and I find the source, and I hit the source, and it's our open data site. And I don't even know who these people are or where it came from, but I'm glad to see somebody, there's somebody else that's using it. So this one I found I was really jealous of, because I've really spent a lot of my time loading data into the Socrata platform, and I haven't had a lot of time to do visualizations. So this woman here, she did a really nice job with all the charts and graphs and showing the information on the accidents. And I know that the Socrata platform has a really nice way to do pie charts and bar graphs, and I haven't really got to do it, so I'm really looking forward to in the next year, like spending some time and learning how to do that. Then this is about boundaries and how some people plow on one side of the street versus the other. And so she used the polygons that we put up into the open data portal and overlaid it on top of an ortho photo. And it was really another interesting use of the data. And as I got ready to do this, I really didn't know how people were using the data. So it was really interesting for me to see that, like people are using it and they like it. The next slide is, I can't read that one. So it's random facts about substance areas. And again, she used Google Maps as an overlay, which, if you don't know how to use ArcGIS data, it's a really good platform to be able to see, because people are very comfortable, they use it. And a lot of the examples that I could see, they all use Google Maps. And it's a really nice interface. And so I found that very interesting. This one here is about itch zones, and it's it's all about bed bugs. And so we put all of our nuisance inspection data and whatnot up, and it all has a geospatial component. But, you know, like there are responsible journalisms out there, and she decided not to show it because she didn't want to embarrass the people, and just kind of wrote a story about it. And I really found that was, you know, it was just all the preconceived notions about providing data out there. It kind of like, it really made me feel good that it's like, it's really okay to do this, you know. I think it's really beneficial to the community, and it really gives them a different way to look at data. This one also is a really nice way. This was done by a student at Trinity College, and it was showing how the different uses of education and how the kids are moving around, and, you know, like how the schools are using it. And it was really a good use of it as well. She's from Trinity College, and I was really happy to see like it's being used in a broad spectrum of areas, and it's been really, really a positive experience for me. And so that's about it. So thank you very much. Yep.
Thank you, Brett. So I think that Brett hit upon some really important key themes here, which is that, you know, mapping and visualizations are showing your data, and on maps, you could show everything from crimes, and that's super important, to perhaps bed bugs, which is kind of scary in its own way. But really, it is kind of that, again, that killer app for showing data. Brett also alluded to Google, and we are very proud to have our partner Google here today, Jordan Breckenridge, and we recently announced our partnership with, let's see if we can advance these. Advance the slide. The clicker. We'll try it again. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and introduce Jordan. So Jordan is the Senior Product Manager for Google Maps Gallery. He joined Google in 2008 as a program manager, helping to build the Google Ground Truth team responsible for developing and maintaining Google's base map data set for Google Maps and Google Maps Mobile. His team built base maps for 40 countries, so global project. And now Jordan is focused on going beyond the base map and unlocking the rest of the world's geospatial data through the power of Google Maps engine. So with that, I'd like to have Jordan come on up and talk with us about the work he's doing at Google.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Jordan Breckenridge, and I am the product manager for Google Maps Gallery, and I generally spend my day thinking about how individual users, citizens, are looking for content that might be associated with the map and what they might be doing in, for example, Google Search to look for that content. And as Erica mentioned, this week we announced a partnership with Socrata, essentially to allow Socrata customers to make it easier to publish their authoritative mapping data to people who are coming to Google looking for that kind of content. And I'll talk through sort of the challenges in trying to figure out what kinds of things you might surface, for example, for a user who's coming to Google and typing in bed bugs or zoning or what have you. And also some of the ways we think about this problem as a sort of very hard problem and one worth solving. Many of you should be familiar with Google Maps and many of the other online mapping tools as well. They're great for a certain class of use case. If you want to find a coffee shop or get driving directions or check out like neighborhood locations or possibly even some imagery, they're great for that thing. They're pretty comprehensive, they're pretty accurate, they're pretty useful for a certain class of data. But if I'm looking for caribou migrations or crime or zoning or real estate sales, open houses, occupancy rates, none of that content you're going to find anywhere essentially in those tools. And if you go to Google or you go to Bing or you go to Yahoo, the best you're going to find often is a PDF file, a JPEG or a GIF file, or some sort of non-interactive, sort of very static thing that's probably years out of date, if not more. And for the average citizen or the average user who's coming to these search engines to find this kind of content, it's a pretty frustrating experience. You just can't trust what you see sometimes. Once in a while, you'll stumble upon great results, but you just don't know time to time. And so a lot of how we're thinking about this is we know there's authoritative entities that have great content like yourselves. How do you better allow the organizations that have that authoritative mapping content to surface it to people who are coming and looking for it? And I'm going to put up some examples here of what I consider to be sort of bad queries or bad results for a variety of reasons, and just talk through them, sort of, the challenges in this problem. So in this case, the number one result is a newspaper result. It's actually a pretty good site if you go look at it. But obviously on the right-hand side, we're elevating information about police stations to a query on crime. It's kind of intuitive why we would do that, but it's obviously not probably what the user intended when they came here typing in crime. In this case, because that number one site is actually a pretty good site, you can go there, you can navigate through. It's a pretty interactive experience. It's not a PDF file. It's actually an okay result, but for the user coming here, they might be misled, or they might not, understand exactly why we're presenting them this result. Another example here, Houston zoning map. Well, it turns out Houston doesn't have a zoning bylaw. If you look 4 results down, you see how Houston gets along without zoning. Yet above that, we're presenting a bunch of image results that came from somewhere on the web. They're probably accurate to some degree, but maybe they're land use, maybe they're the Houston County as opposed to Houston City. But this is all we know about this information, and we do our best to answer that query. But not having those signals from the authoritative entities makes it much harder to figure out what to put up for a user. And I think on the right, these are actually offices for the Planning Commission, as opposed to the zoning or lack thereof. And then finally, I have an example here of a sort of emergency response type use case. This is a query Yosemite fire map. And clearly the user intent was probably to look for updates of a fire perimeter or maybe the status of a fire. The top result is actually pretty good. It's all textual though, there's no map there. So if the user was actually looking for a map, again, they might end up down at these image search results, which could have been from 2006 or 2008, might have been from a non-authoritative entity. We just don't have that insight necessarily. And so a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve and think about is how do you get the signals from those organizations that know the most about their data and can help us sort of get that to the citizen who's coming here looking for this information. Clearly better portals and better websites having up-to-date content is great, but we still have to know how to guide the user to those places so that they find their answer. And it's exacerbated by the fact that many of these users are now on mobile devices. Many of them are trying to answer a question or make a decision. Some of them might be developers or more advanced users like journalists, but that's not necessarily the majority case. The majority case is a pretty average person, coming and doing a search, trying to answer a question, and then trying to do something with that information. So I'm going to talk through sort of just some of the challenges in understanding what a user's intent is when they type a query. So the query, this is a hard to read slide, and I'll explain why it's so hard to read in a second. But the query here is New York City zip codes, or NYC zip codes. And this was an experiment we ran last year with a big map on the left of all the zip codes and a table on the right of the same zip codes by borough. And the orange dots, the concentrations you see, are where users are looking at the screen when they get presented this result. And the reason why I'm presenting this result is that despite this query being somewhat geographic in nature, the user intent was clearly much more biased toward the table than the map. So this would, in our view, would not be necessarily a good map result. Certain things like time zones, for example, maybe have a better map result or better relevance to map results. But in this case, at least, the table was more useful to users. And this just highlights sort of the challenge of understanding sort of what a user is looking for when they come and they do a query. And if they're querying for zoning, do they want the map or do they want the actual bylaw code or do they want something else? But it just kind of highlights that challenge. This is an interesting heuristic that we use quite often to kind of understand possible user intent. These are 2 sets of queries, population versus population density, Yosemite versus Yosemite trails. And the screenshots you're seeing here in very small images is what Google image search returns. And if you look at the population result set, you can probably make out there's a few maps in there, but mainly it's pictures of people, crowds. Whereas if you look at population density, because of the notion of density being a much more geographic concept, you tend to see a lot of maps. And as a result, almost every image research result is a map. And so we would classify that population density query as a much more map relevant query, for example, than just a query for population. And similarly with Yosemite trails. And this, you can actually do this yourself. You can go to Google image search, run a query for your own data, and even if you think a map is a good result, oftentimes it may not be. And sometimes it's keywords like trails or density, but there's a lot of others too, where you just find out there's a big concentration of maps. And so we actually use various machine learning algorithms to classify images that are maps that probably should be map result queries to kind of figure out better ways to present user information. This is another example of one of our consumer tools, Google My Maps, that is basically a consumer map authoring environment. It's a very lightweight tool. You can use it to plan your picnic or you map your fun run. What we find is that users actually use these tools to recreate official data when they can't find the official data. So this is a map of the 2013 Black Forest Fire in Colorado, where the user, just a average citizen, was going on Twitter, watching the sheriff's tweets, and then drawing the map for the evacuation areas as that person saw them being updated. And then this map got shared virally on Facebook and Twitter again as the official sort of evacuation map, even though it really wasn't that official. It was basically kind of created on the fly by an average citizen user trying to compensate for what they perceived as sort of gaps in knowledge. And I'm sure, I didn't actually go look for this, but I'm sure that the Colorado emergency response organizations had their own version of this map, probably not as discoverable. And it just kind of highlights this need that if you can't get the information in the hands of the person who's looking for it, the information largely, is not useful. And if this were a one-time thing, that'd be one thing, but it happens every disaster. And this goes back to 2009, I think. But essentially, we can predict our traffic based on disasters because people are doing things like, are pharmacies open? Where can I find a shelter bed? What is the status of the flood? Can I go back to my house now? These are the kinds of questions people are answering, and they're using these kinds of consumer tools to essentially augment what's being provided by the official agencies. So a lot of what we think about is how do we allow organizations such as yourselves to essentially superimpose your content on Google Maps, but keep control of it, keep branding, keep licensing, keep updates sort of in your control. We don't care what systems you use on your back end. And the reason why we have the Socrata partnership is to make it easier to get that content from the official sources, into these overlays and provide sort of the more authoritative information. And so Maps Engine is the platform that we use internally for producing sort of professional class map output. But with this announcement that we've made, essentially you can synchronize your Socrata data into Google Maps Gallery. Behind the scenes, it lives in Maps Engine, but that's more the means to the end. The actual goal is to get it in the hands of the citizen or the user who's coming to look for it. And Maps Gallery is like it sounds. It's a collection of maps. We use it as a staging point to collect interesting content from a variety of sources, and it's everything from Ebola outbreak maps to historic maps of Tokyo to official city data, graffiti complaints, for example, and things like that. And over time, essentially, the vision is that this content will surface more and more throughout all Google properties. And I have some examples here of content that's been synced from Socrata, as well as examples of how this might look in a future world as it relates to Google Maps and Google Search. So this is a synchronized data set from the city of Chicago from their Socrata product, synchronizing affordable rental developments. And again, this data is not maintained at Google. It's synced periodically to make sure that we have the latest and the greatest content from the city. This is an experiment we ran earlier this year with greatschools.org, which is an organization that is it's a nonprofit that tracks school ratings. And essentially this, you can't really tell from this screenshot, but this is actually Google Maps. So I've gone to Google Maps and I've typed in US school ratings, and this is the result I get. And so the intent here is that the organization has the ability to basically update and maintain this data superimposed on top of Google Maps to make it that much more easy for the average citizen to get to. And this is one experiment we have here, and then I have another one with census data. Same kind of concept though, and this is the vision generally, is that as long as an organization has that authoritative content, how do you make it easier for them to publish it to the average citizen that's trying to find that content? And we think our partnership with Socrata essentially to make that much easier for people like yourselves, helps ultimately the citizens who are looking for it. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think some of the key takeaways from what Jordan was talking about is the importance of discoverability, but also the importance of the integrity of the data. And this is where the matchup between Socrata, yourselves, cities, governments, states, is really important, so we can make sure that the information is published with Google Maps Gallery or other, and that is the accurate information. And when in talking about, for example, emergency situations, it is quite important that that information is accurate. So what I'd like to do now is just open it up for a few questions. I'll start, and then so if you have questions in the audience, we'll move to your questions in just a minute. But Brett, I'm going to start with you. And so, one of the things that we had talked about were kind of from a community perspective, who and how in the community are utilizing the data, the GIS data and information that you have, and kind of what are some of the benefits that you see from that?
Yep. So one of the things I noticed is that when I first published the police data, I had to bring it back down to make some changes to it, and I hadn't had it down for 30 seconds, and I was getting tweets like, "What happened to the police data?" It's just like, sorry, I had to find out I had to make some edits to it, and but I think that it's being used by like university students, and I think it's by entrepreneurs in the city. I also think it's being used by people that are applying for grants. As Sabine and I went out into the community to try to meet some of the folks to put data up that was useful to them, it was very interesting and eye-opening to me to see that all these people actually existed and they really were looking for data. The Socrata, where you can suggest a data set, we get a lot of suggestions in there, and we kind of balance our workload based on that to put data up that people really want. We don't want to put data up just for the sake of putting it up there.
Okay, great. This is just another question to build on that. Do you know what the most used or searched upon or data set that you have published is?
Yep, so the most searched upon is the police data, but one thing I didn't show because I haven't put it into a spatial location is the fire data. So we update on a nightly basis all the data runs that the fire department makes, and there's a fellow that's embedded his embedded building fires into his application, and it gets hit it's thousands of hits. It's way up there.
Okay, great, thank you. Mm-hmm. So Jordan, one of the things that we talked about was kind of discoverability and search. And so, we were talking about, search rankings, which is something that a lot of folks, when they put out their websites or what have you, want to make sure that it is discoverable. So, what are some of the thoughts around that? And you showed us a lot of, examples of searches that went awry.
Yeah.
I think you're on.
I'm on. I think it's a real challenge. A lot of the typical things you do for any website apply in this context as well. So typical search engine optimization type techniques, making sure your data is up to date, making sure your metadata is complete on your website. The challenge is for almost all the major search engines, there's very little you can do to influence your ranking aside from being a popular website. Like if you're getting lots of mentions and lots of references, your ranking will bubble up. But beyond that, you actually don't have a lot of control. Making sure the data is complete, up to date, and out there is probably the most important thing you can do. A lot of what I'm showing is sort of the places where we scratch our heads and say, well, why didn't that work out in a better way? But it's not necessarily something that the average sort of organization can directly control, aside from just making sure they have a great website and a great up-to-date content.
Right. Okay. Great. So, Brett, I'm going to let you off the hook and ask you a little bit of a technical question because I know you really want to talk about it. We talked about getting data loaded into the platform, up and running. So what are some of the technical challenges and how have you solved for them?
Yeah, so the hardest thing was putting the geo part into the data because a lot of the data that you get is we have like an XY coordinate or whatnot, and it's to take that data and to put it in and project it back up so that you can display it spatially on the map. That was probably the hardest part. One thing I will say that because of the ease of the way the Socrata platform worked, once I learned how to navigate the site, I could really focus my energy on automating the process of putting the spatial data into the platform.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so then that ended up working out well for you.
Yes, very well. Yep.
Good.
So we probably have got 15 data sets that update nightly, and there's in that slide that I showed you, I have a staging database, and there's a lot of things that are going on in there to make the data spatially enabled, but it was very interesting process and a great learning experience.
Okay, great. So, Jordan, I'm going to ask you another question. So we mentioned mobile, and mobile is so important to everyone. So can you talk a little bit about access from other types of devices?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth, for those who aren't familiar, I mean, from a Google perspective, I mean, mobile is almost the first experience we think of now when we're designing a new property, just because it's such a common access method. There's some published stats, I think, out there that indicate that Google Maps is now used more on mobile on weekends than desktop maps, which is a pretty huge shift in sort of access method, and even more so if you look internationally beyond that. And so I think like designing mobile first is a really important thing. Obviously being as platform neutral as you can, because you don't necessarily know the form factor or the device OS that you're going to be that your user or your customer is going to be interacting with. I mean, a lot of what we're trying to think through is just how do you provide that data in such a form that it can be essentially superimposed on whatever the map it is, and and whatever device it is. So you have to assume mobile, and you have to assume platform neutrality to some degree.
Right, and is that how you approach the gallery development?
Well, and not just the gallery, but more importantly, the actual Google Maps type experiences. Thinking about how it would look in that mobile experience up front, definitely.
Right. Okay, great. So I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then I think we're going to open it up to the audience for questions from them. Just, and Brett, you had mentioned this as well. So, and it's kind of a question for both of you. There's a variety of ways to basically, collect and then, publish your GIS information. And so, just understanding what are some of the different options, and do you do them all? Like, I think that there's some confusion around that. Like, what's the best approach?
For me, because I'm a GIS guy, I have a lot of very rich data, and I don't have to just geocode data. I can really put it to an actual location, physical location, because I have the base data to support it. So I don't geocode, and none of my data is geocoded, but that's just because I have that option available to me. If I didn't, I'd be geocoding it and putting up into Google Maps.
And I would just add that I think it really depends on sort of who your target audience is and your target user base. For example, Brett had mentioned some of the hackathon type stuff. For example, if you're trying to get that get that data into the hands of developers to then build these next applications, whether they're philanthropic applications or startups or what have you, making sure that your content is developer ready is a very important thing. Whereas if it's more of a citizen targeted use case, like where is my nearest polling station? That's a different class of problem where the user, wants literally an answer to their question. And so I think, thinking through sort of what are the classes of users you're going to satisfy and where are you going to get the most bang for your buck, that's, where I would start.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'd like to see if there's anybody who has been listening to the presentation has some questions that they would like to ask Brett or Jordan. Yeah.
Good morning. This is for Jordan. My name is Bogdan Trenesh, and I'm from Edmonton, Canada. And we were one of the early, I think, worked with your gallery. And what I'm more interested in, there's two parts. How is the arrangement with Socrata going to work? Is it going to be an automated upload or something like that? And also what's required is the metadata associated. One of the requirements is how we classify where we want our map to go to. Now, are you going to provide a more richer one? Because right now what I'm working with is quite narrow, right, and it doesn't have everything that we need for different types of maps.
So in answer to the first question, so when we did the work with Edmonton, who was sort of our initial partner on this effort, we worked directly with Edmonton and a company called Safe Software, which basically provides synchronization tools. Essentially, Socrata is building those synchronization capabilities directly into their platform.
Yeah, I use Safe.
And so, I mean, basically this allows an organization essentially to enable the ability to synchronize from Socrata to Google without having to think about Safe or configure Safe, for example. So that's the first question, I think.
Are you going to be trolling the data sets to automatically upload to your gallery?
There's plans for periodic updates. I can't remember the frequency off the top of my head. I can get back to you on that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But as long as
the intent is the master is kept in Socrata, and basically Google is updated periodically.
Yeah, and you'll be looking for something in one of the fields to upload it.
Yeah, essentially, exactly.
Let me, sorry.
Please.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. So this is an opt-in extension to Socrata that you guys can all choose to do. We encourage you to do it. I think the benefits are pretty self-evident in increasing the reach of the data. It's part of an overall strategy to take all the data in Socrata and find automatic ways to push that data to all the consumer endpoints where it allows you to increase the reach and ultimately the value of your data. So it's part of a strategy. And with respect to Google Map Engine and Google Map Gallery, we're building all these automations into the platform so that when you opt in, we'll work with our partner Google to figure out that metadata standard, if you will. We'll make it super, super easy. So you can choose to push all your maps, a subset of your maps, and then that flow will be completely transparent to you, and it will require no effort on your part. So that's the whole idea, is you get increased reach with just by virtue of being on Socrata.
Use the microphone.
Does it translate well on mobile devices, the data that was basically conceived of it on a desktop platform? How does it transfer to mobile devices?
Yeah. So the answer depends on whether you consume it in Socrata. So there's an answer for that, but I think you might want to have Jordan answer the Google.
So in those last
experience.
examples that I showed, the census example and the Great Schools example, we have those running on essentially both mobile and desktop platforms as sort of demonstrations. And the intent is essentially that the form factor in which the data is presented is dependent on the client, but it flows through naturally. Clearly, like big fancy info windows, might have more challenges on a mobile device. We're not doing anything dynamic to adjust those, for example, but the data itself is there and visible in whatever form you've chosen to expose it.
Right, good. I think we have time just for one more quick question. Is there anybody else that wanted a question?
Yes.
Okay, last question, thanks.
Will Saunders, State of Washington. There's a couple of agencies that have used Google Earth to do flyover tours. Will this integration extend to that product as well?
I should have mentioned, actually, it exists today. So if you go to Google Earth, there's a Earth Gallery button on the left-hand side. If you click on that, you can open that up and see, for example, that City of Chicago data set or the Edmonton data sets. And they're synchronized and updated. So you can be in Earth, the data can change in Socrata, and it will flow through essentially and update what you're seeing. And this is through a native Maps Engine, Google Earth integration that exists. But yes, you can go and look at it in both Earth desktop as well as Earth mobile.
Excellent, great. I want to thank our panelists today, so thank you very much, Jordan and Brett.